Welcome back to Illinois Law. We're talking to you tonight about some of the issues that come up in the special education process, and we were just going to talk about teamwork, the school district and the parents. So let's talk about the team, the IEP. Everyone's heard the term IEP. A lot of people don't know what it means. So who would be present at an IEP meeting, Deb?
Generally, there will be school administrators at an IEP. The parent will be at an IEP. There may be a special education teacher. There may be the general education teacher. Who will be at the IEP is basically all of the team members that are necessary to provide this child with the special education services that are necessary. So you may need a physical therapist, you may need some sort of health professional there, but the purpose of the IEP is to gather all the necessary people to come up with a plan and a goal for the next year.
And is the first step writing the IEP, is the first step determining the child's needs? Where do you go?
Well, you typically start with a good evaluation, which we've talked about, and if the student has not been yet identified as eligible for special ed services, they would review the results of the case study evaluation and then determine what are the areas of need that the student needs services. Does the student need assistance with respect to speech language issues? Does the student have difficulty reading? Does the student have issues with attention? And once those areas of need are identified, the student is typically identified as eligible for special education services under a certain category, and then there are identified areas of need. Those are discussed and identified by the team, and as Deb has said, there's goals and objectives developed responsive to those areas of need, which are put together by the school personnel along with the parents who are discussing the needs and the strengths of the student.
And when they do this, then how do they write up whatever the child is going to have for the next year?
Well, they've decided, based upon the data they've collected and the discussions that they've had, they decide what's the best placement for this child. And there's just a whole, an infinite number of possible placements for this child based upon his or her needs, from very unrestricted, being in their regular classroom with their peers, and then more restrictive environments depending on their particular needs.
And how would you determine the child's specific goals and objectives for the year?
It's based generally off of the evaluation. So the purpose of the IEP is to say, this is what we need to do, and this is how we're going to do it. What you want to look for as a parent is goals that can be measured and goals that basically last for a year. So that allows you to basically chart a student's progress year by year.
And are these broken down then into smaller segments for different times during the year, or is it just 1 year?
Yeah, typically going back to what is an IEP and what does it look like, an IEP is really an individualized plan, and it will be on a paper, on a form that is filled out, and it's going to identify the student's areas of need, where the student is currently performing in certain curricular areas, whether their needs are in reading or math. They're going to actually identify present levels of performance. And then there'll be a goal. What does the team, where would they like to see the student be at the end of that period of time? Typically it's a year. And then there's shorter term benchmarks or short-term objectives underneath each goal to identify progress in shorter periods of time. And typically it's divided up into 3 or 4 periods of time that coordinate with marking periods or grading periods for all of the students in a particular school building. And it's during that period of time that the measurable objectives that Deb and John have talked about would be measured, and then a report would be reported at the conclusion of a quarter or a period of that would be 1/3 through the school year. That report would be shared with the parent.
And just in terms of what Deb said about everything being measurable, explain how you would measure certain things and how you would make sure they were objective.
Right. They all have to be, all the measures used have to be reliable, they have to be valid, and they have to be the student has to be tested by somebody who has been trained to use that particular assessment. So getting back to the idea of scientifically based interventions, also there's scientifically based assessments that are utilized to make sure that the data that we're collecting is accurate and it's something that we can rely upon in making a decision about this child's placement.
Let's just take a very simplified goal and give an example. Say a child hasn't learned the alphabet, because that's a very simplified goal. Mm-hmm. So you want the child to learn the alphabet by the end of the year. This is obviously oversimplification, but give me an idea of how those goals would look and how it would be measured.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think one, again, very simplified response is that if the goal is that the child will learn A through Z and be able to identify all of those letters of the alphabet in lower and upper case, it would be divided up into short terms, short-term objectives or benchmarks, and the student might be asked to identify certain groups of vowels or consonants by the end of the first marking period, and then by the end of the second marking period there'd be additional numbers of letters that the student would be asked, etc. And so it would be measured in a variety of ways. It would be measurable, but it might be through teacher observation, charting of how many letters of the alphabet on a daily basis the student was able to identify, and it might be both informal or formalized evaluations or assessments to determine those things. Mm-hmm. But the goal would be there'd be a system for keeping track of how many letters the student is learning over a particular period of time.
So that's just an oversimplified idea, but it gives people the idea of how this would be implemented. How long does an IEP last, or how often, and can it be revised if it isn't working?
Generally, an IEP will last for a year, but it can be revised if it's not working. And a parent can request a review of an IEP even in the middle of the year if there are problems. A teacher can also request an IEP meeting to reevaluate the IEP if it's not working, even if the year hasn't passed.
Do the school have to give notice to the parents of an IEP meeting and make sure they attend?
Yes. Like everything else in the law, parents have tremendous protections, and there really is no step that a school would take without making sure the parent had been involved in that decision-making process.
And they get written notice?
They do get written notice, and as John has described, and as Deb knows as well, the rights of parents under special education law and the obligations of school districts are very specific, even to the point of identifying how many days notice a parent is entitled to receive. And for an IEP, it's 10 days notice.
And I'm assuming that, again, that website that we gave before, the www.ispe.net, that information would be in the parent's handbook on there.
Yes, it would.
Okay. Just a real quick question before we get to our break. If you're looking at this, does the parent have the right to bring anyone additional to the IEP meeting?
Oh, absolutely. The parent has the right to bring individuals who are knowledgeable about the child to an IEP meeting, who can share information regarding their child, and the parent is encouraged to provide information regarding their child at the IEP meeting. It's really an opportunity for the parents and the school educators to really look closely at sharing information and developing goals for the child.
And after our break, we're going to talk a little bit more about what happens next. Once you've determined the child has an IEP, has special needs, where do we put the child to meet the IEP goals? We'll be back in